The morning light spilled softly over the ocean outside the cliffside home of Finn and Steffy, glimmering against the glass like liquid gold. Inside, the air was filled with the kind of quiet hope that can only come from two people daring to dream again. For months, Finn and Steffy had been talking about expanding their family, about bringing a new life into the world that symbolized renewal after the chaos and grief that had once torn them apart. The idea of another child felt like redemption, a promise that the past could no longer dictate their future. But what neither of them could have imagined was how that same dream would awaken something monstrous in the shadows, something that had been waiting, watching, and plotting its way back into their lives. For Sheila Carter, Finn's mother by blood but a stranger in every other sense, the news that Steffy might soon be pregnant reignited an obsession that had never truly died. For Sheila, motherhood had always been both her crown and her curse. In her mind, love and possession were indistinguishable. To love someone was to claim them, to consume them until they could never escape. She had spent years convincing herself that Finn's rejection wasn't final, that deep down, he was still her boy, the one she had saved, the one who owed her his life. But Steffy's presence, her influence, her very existence had always been the wall between them. And now, with the possibility of a new baby, that wall felt permanent. To Sheila, another child meant another chance to be erased, replaced, forgotten. And so, as Steffy's laughter filled the Forrester home, as Finn wrapped his arms around her with the gentle protectiveness of a man who believed he had finally outrun the past, Sheila's mind was already spiraling into a darkness she mistook for destiny. It began innocently enough, or so she told herself. Late at night, she would sit alone in her apartment, staring at old photographs of Finn, her fingers trembling as she traced his face. She began collecting small pieces of information: Steffy's medical appointments, the name of her obstetrician, the hospital she favored. Each fact felt like control, like taking back something that had been stolen from her. She convinced herself that she wasn't planning anything dangerous, only preparing for what, she couldn't quite say. But the line between obsession and action blurred quickly. Soon, she was following them again, her car hidden at a distance, her eyes fixed on the life she believed should have been hers. Steffy noticed the change in the air before she noticed anything else. It started as a feeling, a prickling unease when she walked alone to her car, the sense of being watched even in her own home. She told herself it was paranoia, a remnant of old trauma. But when she found the wilted flowers outside the gate, the kind Sheila used to send as peace offerings, her stomach turned cold. She didn't tell Finn right away. She wanted to protect their peace, to preserve the fragile joy they were building. But silence, as always, gave danger room to grow. Meanwhile, Finn was consumed with anticipation and fear in equal measure. His medical training made him acutely aware of how fragile life could be, and the thought of bringing another child into their chaotic world filled him with both joy and apprehension. Yet beneath it all was a deeper, unspoken worry: his mother. Though he hadn't seen Sheila in months, he knew her absence didn't mean surrender. He had seen the kind of madness that lived behind her eyes, the way it could twist logic into delusion. When Steffy finally confided her fears to him, he felt the familiar dread return, heavy and suffocating. "She's gone," he tried to reassure himself. "She wouldn't dare come back after everything she's done." But even as he said it, his pulse quickened. He began checking the locks twice, scanning the street before leaving the house. And every time he saw a shadow move where it shouldn't, he thought of her. Sheila's obsession deepened with every passing week of Steffy's pregnancy. When the first rumors reached her, through the gossip that circulated around the hospital cafeteria where she lingered under a fake name, her reaction was visceral. A baby. Another Forrester child. Another soul stolen from her. In her twisted reasoning, this unborn child represented her second chance at motherhood, a chance to do it right this time, to be there from the beginning. And if Steffy stood in the way, then Steffy would have to go. Her first plan was elaborate, even theatrical. She imagined herself disguised as a nurse in the maternity ward, slipping into the hospital unnoticed, waiting for the moment the baby was born. In one fantasy, she took the child as soon as it entered the world, disappearing before anyone realized what had happened. In another, she orchestrated a mistake, a mix-up, a switched baby, a secret she could guard for years until the truth came to light. To Sheila, these were not acts of cruelty, but of justice. She told herself she was restoring balance, reclaiming what was rightfully hers. As her delusions grew, so did her boldness. She began visiting the hospital where Steffy's doctor worked, always wearing a different wig, always pretending to be someone else. A volunteer, a patient's relative, a consultant. Each time, she lingered near the maternity ward, letting the sterile air fill her lungs, imagining the smell of a newborn in her arms. Nurses began to notice her face, familiar, unsettling, but she vanished before anyone could question her. She even managed to slip into Steffy's medical file one night, printing out details she barely understood, just to feel closer to the baby she already considered her own. As Steffy's due date approached, the pressure inside Sheila's mind became unbearable. She began talking to herself, pacing the apartment as if holding a conversation with Finn. "You'll thank me one day," she whispered into the dark. "You'll see that I did it for you, for us." She imagined him standing beside her, forgiving her, loving her. The line between fantasy and reality disintegrated completely. When the first signs of labor came, Steffy was alone. Finn was at the hospital finishing a late shift, and she had been resting when the pain struck. She called him immediately, her voice trembling but calm, and he assured her he was on his way. The drive would take 10 minutes at most. But somewhere in the labyrinth of Los Angeles streets, another car began to move, a familiar figure behind the wheel, her eyes wide, her breath ragged. Sheila had been waiting for this moment. For days, she had been parked near the house, sleeping in her car, surviving on coffee and adrenaline. When she saw the house lights flicker on and Steffy stumble toward the door, clutching her stomach, she knew it was time. Sheila's heart pounded as she followed the car carrying Steffy to the hospital. She kept her distance, watching the taillights cut through the rain-slick streets. Her mind raced with possibilities. Maybe she could intercept the ambulance. Maybe she could pose as medical staff once Steffy arrived. Each scenario flashed before her like a fever dream. When Steffy's car pulled into the hospital's emergency entrance, Sheila parked in the shadows and waited. Inside, chaos unfolded in the way it often does during birth. Rushed voices, flashing lights, hands moving with precision and panic. Finn arrived moments later, breathless, clutching Steffy's hand as the contractions intensified. His relief at being there, and not losing control, was overwhelming. For a few precious hours, the world outside disappeared. There was only them, the pulse of life, the sound of a heartbeat, the miracle of new beginnings. But outside those walls, Sheila was already moving. She slipped through a side entrance in stolen scrubs, her forged badge gleaming under fluorescent light. The corridors buzzed with activity, the perfect cover for her descent into madness. She found the nursery easily. Years of working in hospitals had taught her how to navigate them blind. Through the glass, she saw the rows of bassinets, each holding a tiny, fragile life. One of them, she told herself, belonged to her. When she finally reached the maternity floor, fate, or cruelty, intervened. Finn had stepped out to speak with a nurse, leaving Steffy momentarily alone. Exhausted but radiant, Steffy cradled the newborn in her arms, whispering words of love. She didn't hear the door open. She didn't see the shadow until it was too late. Sheila's voice broke the silence like glass. "He's beautiful," she murmured, her tone trembling between awe and madness. Steffy froze, her heart leaping into her throat. The confrontation that followed was as inevitable as it was horrifying. Steffy's voice was sharp, commanding Sheila to leave, but the older woman moved closer, her eyes fixated on the baby. "You don't understand," Sheila whispered, tears streaking her face. "He's mine too. He's part of me, part of Finn." When Steffy tried to move, Sheila lunged. The struggle was brutal, primal, two mothers, two forces of nature, each fighting for the right to claim the same future. The sound of alarms pierced the air as nurses rushed toward the room, but by the time Finn arrived, chaos had already consumed it. He saw them grappling, Steffy clutching the baby, Sheila screaming something incoherent. Without hesitation, he tore Sheila away, his voice cracking with rage and disbelief. "You've gone too far," he shouted, the betrayal cutting deeper than any wound. Sheila, sobbing, tried to reach for him, insisting that she had only wanted to protect the child, that Steffy was poisoning him against her. But the illusion shattered completely when security dragged her from the room. Her final words echoed down the corridor like a curse. "You can't keep him from me forever, Finn. He's my blood." In the aftermath, silence settled over the hospital like a shroud. Steffy sat trembling, the baby pressed against her chest, tears mingling with exhaustion. Finn held her close, but his heart was a storm. He had saved them both, yet part of him knew that this was not over, that Sheila's madness was a fire that could not be extinguished by walls or laws or even love. Days later, as the press swarmed the hospital and law enforcement tightened its grip around Sheila's arrest, Finn visited her in custody. He had to see her one last time, not out of sympathy but closure. She looked smaller behind the glass, stripped of her arrogance, but the madness in her eyes remained. "I did it for you," she said softly, pressing her hand to the barrier. Finn's answer was steady, but cold. "You didn't do it for me. You did it because you can't let go." When he returned home, the weight of what had almost happened sank in fully. He watched Steffy sleeping with their newborn beside her, the room bathed in moonlight. For the first time, he truly understood what it meant to protect something fragile, not just from the world, but from the past. The war with Sheila wasn't just about survival, it was about identity, about drawing a line between blood and love. Outside, the waves crashed endlessly against the rocks below their home, the sound both haunting and eternal. Somewhere, far away, in a cell where light barely reached, Sheila whispered lullabies to ghosts only she could hear. The story was far from over, but for now, the house on the hill was filled with life, fragile yet fierce, beating against the darkness that would never stop trying to return. The days after the tragedy blurred into something that didn't quite resemble time. For Steffy, the world became soundless, colorless, suspended in a haze of disbelief. The nursery was still, soft blankets folded, a mobile hanging motionless above an empty crib. She could still smell him. Milk, lavender, a trace of the ocean that drifted through the window at night. Every heartbeat reminded her of what had been taken, every silence of who had done it. There were moments when she almost believed it hadn't happened, when she reached for the child she could no longer hold. But reality always came crashing back, the cruel, echoing truth that Sheila Carter had finally destroyed everything. Finn tried to hold her together, but grief had hollowed her out. He spoke to her softly, pleaded with her to rest, but his voice was like static in her ears. All she could hear was the sound of Sheila's voice, the shrill, trembling tone from that night, the words that haunted her. "He's my blood." The police had called it a tragic accident, an unpredictable escalation during Sheila's breakdown, but to Steffy it was nothing less than murder. And worse than the loss was the knowledge that Sheila was still breathing somewhere, caged but alive, when her baby was not. Sleep became a stranger. She wandered the house at night, barefoot, tracing her fingers along the walls, listening to the faint creaks that sounded like whispers from the past. The photographs of her family mocked her, their smiles, their perfection. She had fought so hard to build this life, to protect it from darkness, and now darkness had seeped in again, unstoppable. When she looked in the mirror, she no longer saw the woman Finn loved. She saw something sharper, colder. She saw a mother with nothing left to lose. Finn's grief was different, quieter, inward. He tried to channel his pain into work, to drown himself in the hospital's sterile order. But Steffy's grief frightened him. She had stopped talking about healing. She spoke instead of justice, of balance. When she mentioned Sheila's name, it came out like poison. "She took my child," she whispered one night, her eyes distant. "I'll take everything from her." Finn reached for her hand, but she pulled away. The distance between them grew like a shadow. Steffy began visiting the courthouse, sitting through every hearing, every procedural delay. Sheila sat on the other side of the glass, her wrists bound, her expression unreadable. The trial was slow, filled with legal jargon that meant nothing to a mother who had buried her child. When the verdict finally came, life imprisonment with a possibility of parole, Steffy's world shattered again. Possibility of parole. 2 words that mocked her. 2 words that meant the woman who had ripped her soul apart could one day walk free. That night, Steffy stood outside the prison gates long after everyone else had gone. The wind tore through her hair, cold and relentless. She watched the lights inside flicker, imagining Sheila behind them, safe, fed, breathing. The injustice was suffocating. She pressed her palm to the fence, whispering through the steel, "You don't get to live in peace. Not while my baby's gone." Her spiral deepened quietly. She began collecting details about Sheila's confinement, the guards who watched her, the doctors who treated her, the routines that governed her days. She didn't know what she planned to do with that knowledge, only that having it made her feel powerful again. Control had always been the currency of her life, and grief had bankrupted her. Now, revenge became her way back to feeling alive. Those around her noticed the change. Rich saw it in her eyes, the same fire that had once driven her to fight for everything she loved, now burning uncontrollably. Thomas tried to reach her, reminding her of family, of boundaries, but she barely heard him. Brooke whispered to Ridge that Steffy was unraveling. But no one could stop her, because Steffy no longer believed in help. When Finn discovered what she was doing, her calls to former security contacts, her inquiries about parole hearings, he confronted her in the middle of the night. "This isn't you," he said. "You're letting her win." But Steffi's laughter was hollow.
"She already won," she said.
"All I have left is to make sure she never breathes easy again." Finn's fear turned into heartbreak. He had already lost a child. Now he was losing his wife, piece by piece. Steffi's dreams became violent. In them, she saw herself confronting Sheila, saw the woman pleading, saw herself unflinching. The dreams felt like memories of something she hadn't yet done. She woke drenched in sweat, her heart pounding with a mix of dread and anticipation. Her rational mind knew she was crossing into dangerous territory, but pain has a way of rewriting morality. One evening, while Finn was at work, Steffy drove out toward the coast. The prison wasn't far. Nothing in California ever seemed far enough. The road curved along the cliffs, the ocean roaring below like an audience to her torment. She parked at a lookout, the headlights cutting through mist, and sat there for hours. Somewhere behind those walls, Sheila slept peacefully. The thought clawed at Steffi's chest until she couldn't breathe. A voice inside her whispered that this was the moment to make a choice, to reclaim what was hers. But another voice, faint and pleading, reminded her of Finn, of her daughter, of what vengeance might cost her. She gripped the steering wheel, trembling between rage and reason. For a moment, she saw her reflection in the windshield, the same wild eyes she'd once seen in Sheila. That realization terrified her more than anything. When she returned home, Finn was waiting, his face pale from worry. She didn't speak. She simply fell into his arms, sobbing until dawn. He didn't ask where she had gone. He didn't need to. The silence between them was heavy but alive, a fragile thread that still tied her to humanity. Days turned into weeks. Steffy began therapy again, reluctantly at first. Taylor sat across from her, patient, gentle, reminding her that justice and healing were not the same thing. There were moments when Steffy believed her mother, moments when she could almost imagine a future beyond vengeance. But grief has its own gravity. It pulls you back no matter how far you try to climb. Sheila's name remained a wound that refused to close. Even from prison, her shadow loomed. Every letter she sent to Finn, every rumor about her condition reignited Steffi's fury. Yet something had shifted within her. The rage had cooled into something sharper, clarity. She no longer fantasized about destroying Sheila physically. She wanted to destroy her peace. To ensure that every day of her life was haunted by the knowledge that Steffy Forrester was still standing, still unbroken, still watching. And so she began to rebuild, not as a victim, but as a survivor forged in fire. She returned to Forrester Creations, channeling her pain into design. Her work became darker, more visceral, collections that mirrored her transformation. The critics called them haunting, the press called them genius. Only Steffy knew they were something else entirely. War cries stitched in silk. Finn remained by her side, though the distance between them never fully disappeared. He loved her more fiercely for her resilience, yet feared what her strength could become. Late at night, he would watch her sleep, wondering if she was dreaming of their lost child or of the woman who had taken him. Meanwhile, in a cold prison cell miles away, Sheila lay awake, her mind spinning. She felt it, the presence of Steffy's hatred, like a pulse through the walls. She smiled to herself, whispering into the dark, "You can't let me go, can you?" And somewhere in Los Angeles, under the same moon, Steffy opened her eyes, whispering back into the night, "I don't have to let you go. I just have to outlive you."